Welcome to the first episode of The Global Indian. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. I'm Chandni Krishnan, and today we will have with us Dr. Rohit Kohli in just a short while. Let me introduce you to our guest today. Dr. Kohli received his medical degree from the prestigious Armed Forces Medical College in India, followed by postgraduate training in pediatric gastroenterology and hepatology. He is currently the head of division of pediatric gastroenterology at the Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, the fifth ranked children's hospital in the United States. He is also a faculty and professor of pediatrics at the University of Southern California's Keck School of Medicine. His area of clinical expertise is liver transplantation in children. Dr. Kohli has a huge body of research work to his credit, including peer-reviewed articles in Nature, Nature Reviews, the Journal of Biological Chemistry, Journal of Pediatrics, and the American Journal of Physiology. He is also the author of many book chapters and review articles. He has a science research lab which is supported by the National Institutes of Health to study liver diseases, such as those caused by obesity. And last but not the least, he is the co-chair for the Center for Global Health Council at the Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. Welcome, Dr. Kohli. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today on our first episode of The Global Indian. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me, Chandni. The pleasure is all mine. And I'm doing well. We all are doing the best we can during these trying times, so no complaints.
Right, yeah. That's the best we can do, right? So let me jump right into the questions that I have for you. We are really excited and want to learn everything possible about the work that you do and how you do it. Tell us a bit about your journey all the way from AFMC in Pune to the US and the work that you do. Why medicine? How did you choose the fields that you're working in, the liver and gastroenterology?
That's touching my heart. The reason we all think about careers can be different, but I think at the end of the day, helping people is a common theme. That's what I thought of when I think back all the way to high school, in Delhi, when I was thinking about what should I be doing when I grow up, So helping people is always a basic tenet. And medicine allows you to do that. And the Armed Forces Medical College, where I trained in Pune, which you mentioned, is one of the best institutions in the country, allowing you to do that, to gain empathy and to gain expertise. GI and liver, that bug was instilled in me at the All India Institute. I came back to Delhi after my MBBS in Pune and worked for some time at Safdarjung and at AIIMS. People who know Delhi will know those two institutions. Mm-hmm. And at AIIMS, I had the privilege to be mentored by a great professor, Dr. Narendra Arora. And he became my idol. He was a pediatric hepatologist back in the 1990s when, as a medical student, I had not even heard of that field. But when I worked with him, I realized I want to be like him. So I think when you think about people who influence you, that's when you make that turn. And I said, okay, if I want to be like him, I have to come up with a pathway to get trained. And the US was that pathway.
Awesome. People who influence us, our mentors, they have so much to do with who we are. Now, the thing is that most people have learned or at least read about organs like the heart, the skin, the brain, and symptoms related to those. But most of us have never considered the liver as something important in our life. And why is that?
Let's change that today. Let's all of us understand. So for a hepatologist, or the specialty that we call ourselves when we think about liver disease, any triangle is a liver, hence fourth, unless proven otherwise. But all jokes aside, I think when you think about...
That's interesting that the liver is a triangle, because The heart is so popularized. I think we should popularize the liver again, the triangle that's the liver.
Happy to send you pictures. If you think about the connection, you mentioned the heart. Connection of the heart to the body, it is giving back blood. It's giving back blood that is enriched with oxygen so that we can function as human beings. But that very same blood has to go through the liver for a different purpose, and that is to be cleansed and to be purified of all toxins that we eat and intake or the body produces. So if you don't have the liver, then your blood, similar to how the heart pumps it forward with oxygen from the lungs, you will not be pumping clean blood. So you would need the liver as a primary purpose to make sure that the blood that we have in the rest of our body is safe. There are many other, of course, reasons that the liver is important, including making proteins that help the blood clot, to maintain our blood glucose. When we don't eat, the liver is what releases slowly glucose back into the blood so that the rest of the body has energy. So there are so many reasons the liver is important.
Yeah, exactly. Can you tell us about your many years of groundbreaking research, if I may just use that term, on obesity-related fatty liver disease? I think it's called NAFLD. And how is it caused? Why should we be aware of it?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's like a tsunami. It's like an epidemic that we are facing with obesity worldwide. It used to be that we said obesity is a disease of the more developed world, parts of the Western hemisphere, but no longer. I mean, India, China, any other emerging economy you can look at, the rates of obesity, especially in children, is dramatically rising. And obesity impacts so many different parts of our body. When we focus on the liver, as I just mentioned, releases glucose slowly into our bloodstream when we need, and we haven't eaten for a few hours. That is our resource, right? So it's almost like our piggy bank for energy. And when we have too much in our piggy bank, the piggy becomes big. So it's storing, the storage organ, unfortunately, becomes a system wherein now fat is accumulating, because you cannot store sugar. So you have to convert sugar into fat, and that becomes how the liver has fat in it. And if you have too much energy to be stored, you end up with fatty liver disease. And unfortunately, with the rising rates of obesity today, a lot of adults, especially in Asia, especially with our genes as South Asians in the Indian subcontinent, we have rising rates of liver cancer and needs for liver transplant in adults, not in children, from fatty liver disease.
Yeah, that's a very serious, grim sort of picture. And this is the time to catch it, I'm thinking, right?
Yeah, the earlier the better. I mean, we have been talking about this for the last 2 decades, ever since we understood the importance of it within our scientific community. And one of the things that we came out with a few years ago are guidelines for pediatricians and general practitioners to start to screen, to look for fatty liver disease in children. So we've suggested that at the age of 9 or 10 years of age, when you do an annual physical exam with your regular doctor, with your pediatrician, that they consider what is your weight and height. We call it the body mass index. And when you look at BMI and you see that the child is above a certain percentile cutoff where we designate as being overweight, at that time you should do a blood test to look for injury in the liver. So that has been now promulgated as a specific guidance to pediatricians, at least from the North American Society of Pediatric Gastroenterology. And I had a little bit of a part in developing those guidelines. So when you talk about impact, those are the kinds of things that I feel are really impactful, where you do work in a laboratory or you understand something in your clinic, and then with your research, you're able to disseminate it across the globe.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest impact one can have, is your writings, your work spreading out and helping children or adults that you have never seen or will never see.
Absolutely, yeah. So I know that you suggested a different expansion for NAFLD, and you're not alone. I think there are other doctors who want the same. Can you tell us what that expansion could be, and why does it affect, like how does medical nomenclature matter to patients and the way that they see the disease?
That's a very good question. So it needs a little bit of history as to how the name, the nosology came about in the first place. So everybody in the general public probably knows the disease, alcoholic liver disease, right? We have it in our movies, in Bollywood, and everywhere. People know daru peene se liver kharab ho jata hai. So when you think about that, alcoholic liver disease has a particular type of image. When you do a liver biopsy under the microscope, when pathologists look at the liver, they say, oh, this looks like alcoholic liver disease. So back in the 1980s, there were a set of cases that a pathologist kept on saying, this is alcoholic liver disease. And the physician would write back to the pathologist and say, no, these individuals do not drink alcohol. How can they have alcoholic liver disease? So finally, they got them talking to each other, and they had a set of these patients, and they discovered one commonality in all of these patients was that they were overweight or obese. So they understood that the liver is being damaged by non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So they looked the exact same under the microscope. So that's how the term came about. Now, I'm a pediatrician. I think all of us would agree that alcohol in a child, probably not a problem, right? So why should be it used inside the name of a disease that a child is being given? So that's where I first off disagree with using non-alcoholic NA as the expansion in children. So my suggestion is use nutrition associated fatty liver disease. Other people have called it metabolic associated fatty liver disease, or MAFLD. Whichever way, let's take alcohol out of the picture. It was a negative connotation that I want to get rid of.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's so important, what we call things and the message that it delivers to others, right?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, when you start to call it either nutrition associated or metabolic associated, now you understand where to focus your energies as a patient. So it may be true that sugar leads to fat production, and as it is damaging the organs inside our body, sugar can manifest itself as an alcohol in a chemical term, but let's not use that, right? Let's focus on the fact that sugar is the problem, and we have to take added sugar out of our diet. That's the only way we're going to move forward. So unless you name something appropriately, people are not going to respond appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us about NASH? What is NASH? And that's something like I've never heard before till I wanted to interview you. Why don't we hear more about it? Is it something we should be concerned about?
Yeah, so NASH is actually the severe form of fatty liver disease, right? So the S and the H stand for steato, which steato means fat, and hepatitis is, in general, when there is inflammation in the liver, when the liver is unhappy, we call it hepatitis for whatever reason. We all have heard of maybe hepatitis B or hepatitis C. That's when the liver is unhappy from having a viral infection from a virus that is called hepatitis B virus or hepatitis C virus. Here we're dealing with the liver being unhappy when you've had fatty liver disease for some time. So you have inflammation in the liver, you have scar in the liver, and that's when I mentioned early on in our talk that we are seeing adults develop end-stage liver disease, or the term that people probably will have heard before is cirrhosis. And that's when you start having complications from your liver disease. And finally, the only solution sometimes is to have a liver transplant. Now, if you back up, why haven't we heard of it? That's a very important question, because it's a silent disease. It doesn't cause you fever, it doesn't give you a rash, it doesn't swell your joints. So for the vast amount of time that you are suffering through this disease, you have no suffering. it's a quiet disease. So you will not know the person sitting next to you has NASH because they have no overt symptomatology.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. So I'm not sure if you mentioned it, like, is there, or we'll come to that later, where you'll tell us about how it can be reversed or prevented before it becomes.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it now or later. I mean,
okay.
We talked about the end stage component where you have to then think of drastic measures like transplantation, but we would like not to get there in the first place.
Yes.
So screening is most important. Like I said, we have suggested that starting at 8-9 years of age, if you have the qualification, if you want to call it the misqualification of falling into obesity or overweight category, then we should screen and do a blood test to see if you have the liver numbers abnormal in your blood tests. If you find that your liver numbers are abnormal, then we have to focus on your diet. You have to focus on your lifestyle. I mentioned sugar as one of the biggest culprits. It's hiding. There are so many places. It's not just in your tea and coffee. It's not just in your colas and your sodas. It is in everything imaginable. If you turn the nutrition label and read it on the processed foods that we all, unfortunately, all surrounded by today in our grocery stores, in our supermarkets, you will see that the line that says added sugar or sugar is sometimes off the charts. We don't need more than maybe 10 grams as an adult even of sugar in our diet a day, and we take in so much more. So first step would be screening. Second step would be looking at diet.
Right. So connected to that, you have said that you have a slogan: if it is sweet and you can pour it, kick it out the door. Tell us how you came up with that.
It's a journey, so we were one of the first people to start a fatty liver disease clinic back in the early 2000s for children. And that time I was not in Los Angeles, I was in Ohio, the state of Ohio in the US. And we were seeing these rising rates of obesity. We saw all these children with liver disease. We created this clinic especially for them. And we would talk about lifestyle. We would talk about you need to exercise, you need to eat healthy fruits, vegetables. We know the right thing. All of us know what to do, right? But the children who are 10, 12 years of age, when we used to tell them all these long list of things to do, they would come back in 2 or 3 months to see me and they have done nothing. They were back to square zero or maybe even gained more weight. So I was very disheartened. So I started to think, what is the one thing I can tell them to start a conversation, which is the most important? And that's where I came up with this, just one fine day, came up with this slogan or jingle, if you want to call it. And now we even have a cartoon video of it online, if you want to Google, and you can find on YouTube, Children's Los Angeles Fatty Liver, you'll find it. And it goes like this. It says, if it's sweet and you can pour, kick it out the door. So they remembered that. Finally, it clicked. And they would come back and they're starting to say, okay, I'm not going to drink all these things because, they can remember it every day. And then you move on to better advice or more detailed advice after that. But that's step one. Let's at least start getting rid of all these colas and sugary drinks.
Awesome. That's how you got the messaging to really speak to the audience that you wanted to reach.
You have to connect to the children. You cannot, if you tell a 12-year-old boy or a 13-year-old girl that if you do these good things, at age 40, you will not get a liver transplant. They don't care.
That's true.
they really want to know about today. And so I think focusing on concrete things is always helpful for children.
Absolutely. So I just want to, segue to our Indian, section of the population. I know that there are a lot of people of Indian origin in the US, just like there are in Canada. How do we compare in terms of this particular syndrome or disease with other populations and ethnic groups? Are we better off? Are we worse off? How is it?
So there is limited data, but whatever data we have access to is not very positive, unfortunately. For the Asian population, specifically even for the South Asian population, obesity has come with many increased risks. So you may be at the same level as a person of Asian origin in terms of weight and height and age and gender. Compared that to a person who is of, say, African descent or European descent, we as Asians will have a much higher level of coronary artery disease. A lot of us know that, but we are also at higher risk of NASH, unfortunately. There was a very nice study from Yale now almost 2 decades ago, which showcased even in their medical student population, the South Asians being, a lot of us are doctors and go into medical training, and they found that the South Asian population had higher risk factors. And we are seeing this consequence at much lower body mass index than anyone else in, say, an African American population or a European descent population would find. So we are definitely at higher risk, unfortunately.
So that is a very sobering thought, like something that all of us as Indians or people of Indian origin should sit up and take notice of. That there seems to be some sort of genetic predisposition along with the nutritional and lifestyle factors that you have already mentioned.
Yeah, I think there is a construct of nature and nurture, right? We can't change our nature. Our genes are our genes. So we are born, as you said, with genetic predispositions for different disorders. What we can change is our nurture. So can we take the sugar out of our diet, excess sugar? Can we, and these things are global. We're talking on a global platform, and they're no different for somebody who is ill in India and Canada or the US. If you're born with a certain genetic predisposition, it behooves us, it is important for us to pay attention to any mitigating factors we can come up with. And this is in front of us, right? We as parents, for instance, if we're in the grocery store, the shopping cart or the bag is in our hands, we have control, at least till a certain age group of our children, as to what we bring home for them. So it's important that we pay attention to those things.
You're so right. So I want to just touch on the connection between obstructive sleep apnea and liver disease, which you have spoken about. And I think a lot of us know about snoring, but we don't know like what that means, if it could be sleep apnea even, or if there's a connection between these two. Tell us a bit more about that. And it's so common, like I would say it's
yeah. No, it's a very interesting discovery, I would say, that has been even for me. I would think, okay, if you're overweight and obese, a few decades ago, I would have said, yeah, you can have cardiovascular disease, heart disease, you can have liver disease, and you probably can also have snoring and sleep apnea. Right? It's one of the things that you will have because you're overweight and so forth. But what we have now discovered and understood, that it is an independent risk factor. Mm-hmm. So just like certain individuals who have genetic predisposition to get severe liver disease, it seems like there are certain predispositions that people get sleep apnea. The interesting part is that the people who get sleep apnea are the same people. There's a very big overlap that get severe liver disease. So you asked me earlier, what are the signs that we could look for? Actually, I correct myself. This is one of the not silent things that we can look for. If you have somebody who is overweight, obese, and has snoring, they're probably at a higher risk of having severe liver disease as well. So this is something that you can hear, maybe not your own self, but your friends and family can tell you, you have this problem, maybe you should get checked out. So if you fit the two characteristics of being overweight, obese, and snoring, you should get your liver checked out as an adult, yes.
Right. And you have done so many years of research on nutrition in the context of liver disease. What were your, main aha moments that you can share with us?
I think it goes back to the global perspective. When we think about disease and caring for children, I mean, growing up in different parts of the world, including India, and then working in India and now in the US, what I have seen is that diseases and humanity travel everywhere. And if you need resources for treatment, They're available everywhere. We all know about medical tourism. We have a global health track even here at Children's Los Angeles. We service everyone. And how we connect goes back to your question, which is research. If we are doing research in US or India or Canada, it connects all of us together. So if I come up with a new aha moment, like you asked, so in 2010, for instance, we discovered that when you expose animals, this was a preclinical study, not a human study, expose animals to fructose and sucrose, which are sugars, they are the ones that get more liver disease, NASH, not the ones that you just give a high-fat diet to. With high-fat diet, you will get overweight and obese, but when you add drinking water laced with sugars, fructose and sucrose, just like you would be drinking a cold drink, soft drink, that's when you get the fibrosis and scarring in the liver. So now you can say that that is a mouse study and it's not relevant, but no, that study today, last time I checked, I think a few weeks ago, that has been used by other researchers in their papers and referenced now almost 800 times. So you see how that knowledge multiplies across the world. So we become a microcosm when you research all the way down to the molecular level, but then you become global when you share that knowledge. So I think knowledge sharing is important. Care to be shared is important. Another aha moment was when we started to investigate how to treat obesity. Definitely diet and exercise are the best ways to treat obesity, but unfortunately some people are undergoing surgery to make their stomach smaller and bypass, gastric bypass. So we said, why don't we study those things that are working? We know gastric bypass, weight loss surgery produces weight loss, right? But I don't want children to get it. I don't want adolescents to get it. So can we find things that are within that system and use them for children, use them for adults? So we found that if you take away the signaling of bile acids, liver produces many things. We talked about liver function early on. One of the things it produces is bile. Pith, as we call it in Hindi. And that bile can signal to the liver and other parts of the body to improve health. So we figured out that that is something we should focus on. So now we have many companies, and I have obviously not going to take any names here, but are working on bile acid signals as potential treatments for NASH, which we would not have had if we had not uncovered. This was a paper we had in Nature in 2014 in the journal Nature, where we discovered that bile acid signaling is key for these surgeries to work. So let's use that signaling to our advantage.
Yeah, very interesting. How, one discovery leads to the next and it sort of builds up. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. On that note, I would like us to just take a short break, and then we'll be back again in a few short minutes.
The most fascinating water world on Earth, the Great Backwaters, Kerala.
Welcome back to the Global Indian interview with Dr. Rohit Kohli. So, Dr. Kohli, now there's something that I'm really interested in as a first-generation immigrant to Canada. You have referred to the susceptibility of immigrant families and how, as an immigrant yourself, your practice, your approach has been shaped by your experiences as an immigrant. Can you tell us something more about that?
I think empathy is the biggest thing that one learns. All of us carry different kinds of bubbles on top of our heads, metaphorically speaking. Immigrants definitely carry the load of two different genres, especially when you're thinking about the immigrant themselves. Therefore, they have children who are first generation. They have parents who are left behind and family left behind in the home country. And while living in the host country, you are now trying to balance those two things, where you have to connect with the first generation, with your children, you have to also continue the connection back home with your friends and family and parents, and be the merge. So when you add a health issue on top of that, that definitely adds another layer of complexity, where now you're talking about interventions which sometimes traditional medicine, from if you're from China, from India, or another Asian, the strong traditional medicine roots there, not to speak to a pun, but balancing that with modern medicine, for instance. So those kinds of things definitely are there. And I circle back to empathy, which is important in those kinds of situations. And we deal with that not just as immigrants, but also we talked a little bit about global health and medical tourism. People are traveling all across the world to seek medical care. When they land at LAX, at Los Angeles International Airport, there are so many different ways they have to adjust if they're seeking care at, say, our hospital, Children's Los Angeles. And that becomes back to the word empathy. Unless you empathize with the immigrant or the medical tourist, you don't know the bubble on top of their head.
Right. This is something that you, I think, spoke about before, that the sugar is the root of all problems. And you also touched on some research related to fat versus sugar. So would you say that fats are okay, or some sorts of fats are okay, or just in a certain quantity they are okay? What do we know about fats?
So you have to definitely keep that within context. And the context is someone who is overweight and obese is when we're talking about this, right? Okay. So if we're trying to lose weight, then the first step in my playbook is always to cut out added sugar. Mm-hmm. When you say, are fats essential? Yes, there's actually a terminology called essential fatty acids, or EFAs. So there is a certain amount of fat that our body needs that you have to take extrinsically, take from the outside. But overall, there is a unlimited mechanism for absorption of sugars. You can continue to take sugar and the body will absorb it and then keep storing it away in your piggy bank for a rainy day, which sometimes never comes. In today's age, we continue to get more and more storage. However, if you eat an excessive amount of fat, which I do not encourage, but just as an experiment, we've sometimes had a very fatty meal, you will malabsorb, you will have diarrhea, you will lose the excess fat. That is not true for sugars. There's the contrast is striking to me, is that on one side, there are some essential fatty acid needs. On the other side, there is an unlimited capacity to absorb sugar. So where should we start cutting when we have to cut? We should be cutting on the sugar side.
Awesome. I like what you said about the body seems to have a mechanism in place if you have excess fats, even though it's clearly understood that that's not recommended. But regardless, the body seems to have some ways of dealing with it.
Right. So I think back to the contrast between nature and nurture, right? There probably was a natural need. Therefore, in our genetics, we have a control over how we used to be a necessity for hunting and gathering food, which is now no longer the case. We just walk up to the shelf in the supermarket and pick up whatever we want. So that hunting and gathering need led to us, when we find food, let's take it in and then we store it. And that, unfortunately, that storage has become our problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Indians, I keep coming back to this topic. The issue is that culturally, we are very fond of sweets. And we have a ton of festivals. And these days, people even celebrate festivals from different states. Like I'm from Kerala and I celebrate Onam and I have my sweets for Onam. But then I also probably celebrate Diwali and I have sweets for those too. Right. So how do we navigate? Like, what can we do to mitigate our, exposure to sugar? And how can we care for our liver, but also keep some of our cultural events and practices and festivals alive?
It's a very good question. And of course, we adopt in our host countries, we adopt new festivals, right? So we start doing in the US Thanksgiving and so on and so forth, right? So no, I get your question. It's very relevant. So I'm not going to ask somebody to completely absolve themselves of all things sweet. I have not done it myself, but there is a true need for moderation, right? If you are celebrating a festival and there is a birthday party, or there's a celebration for somebody graduating in your house, of course, have a small slice of cake, have a traditional sweet. But to say that that has to be our uh, mechanism for sustenance, that is not correct. If you look around, individuals walking with these mega big jars of soft drink, or the size of the juice glass that they have, that is not a necessity. We have gone, I think, the differentiation we need to have is what is a need versus what is greed. And yes, if it's a auspicious event and you have to serve a token, do that. If you want to treat yourself, do that. But you don't live off of that. Your lifestyle cannot be based on these exceptions. I agree with the exceptions, but do not make them your lifestyle. The day-to-day still has to be disciplined.
Yeah, I get it. So you're saying that we should maintain our sense of balance and proportion, keep special events special, and rather, fewer and rarer. And your daily life, that's what we focus on, the 80% probably, or 90% of your life.
Completely agree. You've hit the nail on the head.
Awesome. So I just want to jump to children, which I know that children are so close to your heart. That's the work that you do and how this whole thing affects them. So this disease is, like you said, it's asymptomatic, even in kids till very late. And I know that you touched a little bit on how the things that pediatricians are being recommended that they should do. So how do parents know? So like obesity, I know, can you like elaborate a little bit on that? Like how do parents know if their child needs to be assessed?
No, that's a good question. What can we as individuals do inside the house?
Yeah.
And I would say we talked about the supermarket or the buying potential control that we have, what comes into the house.
Yeah.
If you don't buy a lot of processed foods, if you don't bring in a lot of colas, soft drinks, then the children will not have access to them for sure. At least easy access is taken away. That's step one, prevention. Two is identification of the problem and acknowledging that there is a problem if there is one. We have this propensity sometimes, a lot of us, to say, oh, a healthy child has to be chubby, or and so forth, right? Grandmothers.
Johnson's ads for that, I guess.
Yeah, so we have to be objective about this, that when we look at, especially at our South Asian children, we have to make sure that we understand the consequences of being quote unquote chubby. So let's go with data to make sure we understand what is lean, what is the right weight for a certain age and sex of a child.
Yeah.
And if we are keeping those keen eyes and we see our child getting to be on the overweight side, one of the things that is visible sometimes is if you look at the nape of the neck, you will see some dark lines forming around here. And you may notice your teenager having that and you say, oh, then maybe not showering well enough or cleansing themselves well enough. But that's not the case. That is a sign of the body responding to high insulin levels in secretion. It is a pre-diabetic sign. So talk about that with your pediatrician or child's doctor when you go next time. Are you concerned about these lines? We call them, if they turn out to be related to weight and pre-diabetes, we call them acanthosis nigricans. That's the technical term. It's not important, but you ask for something that you can see at home. So watching their weight and looking for subtle signs like this definitely can be helpful.
That is so interesting that you came up with something that parents would generally notice. And so what makes for a healthy diet in a child?
I think balance is going back to very, very basic things. Balance is critical. So we talked about sugar already quite a bit. So that's step one.
Yeah.
The second step would be to make sure that the portion size is optimal. You don't want to overwhelm your system with large loads of food going in at the same time. So definitely the size of the plate that we serve food in is important. The size of the bowl that you keep there. So that's a self-control mechanism. And the third is the ratio of carbohydrates to protein on the plate. So step one, make sure you don't buy the sugary drinks and the sugary rich foods, processed foods. That's just step one, prevention. Step two, choose the right size of plate so that you're not inadvertently overwhelming your system with large portion sizes. Step three, now decide what you have to put on the plate. And a very simple thing is if you're eating, say, dal chawal, right? If you're eating rice and lentils, lentils are where the protein comes from. Rice is carbohydrate, is going to be processed and then stored again as fat. So let's have a ratio which is more protein and less carbohydrate. So if you are a meat eater, if you're non-vegetarian, then you're choosing between, say, flour-based chapati or tortilla or whatever, if you're Spanish origin, and chicken or another meat. So I would again suggest more protein, less carbohydrate. In the same plate, you are not asking somebody to give up anything. You're just eating a different amount of the things that are available already to you. So those three steps will be really helpful. I don't want to quote unquote overwhelm anybody with information, but those three simple steps: take out the processed and the sugary added sugar foods, concentrate on your portion size, and then what you put on your plate, balance out more protein, less carb.
Awesome. And how common is liver transplantation in children, and where exactly are they done in India, for instance, or is it only in the US?
No, it's a great question. It's something very close to my heart, and going back all the way to my days at the All India Institute, this was one of the things that at that time was in nascency in India, but not today. It's an established care that is available in many centers across India. The pediatric liver transplantation in the US, it's about 500 to 600 children who get transplanted in the United States every year for different diseases. Some are congenital, some are acute liver failure acquired from certain problems. So for instance, our institution at Children's Los Angeles, we do anywhere from 25 to 30 liver transplants a year for children. And it's a great success rate. These used to be considered to be very experimental back in the 1980s, but today these are established therapies, approved therapies, go-to therapies. And we have, for instance, a 3-year survival of patients now at 97%. So very, very gratifying to see these children who have gone on now 20 years later to, I'll give you an example, gone to medical school, gotten married, had their own children, healthy. So when you transplant an adult, do a liver transplant in an adult person, you're giving them a lease on life, another restart to their life. When you do a liver transplant for a child, you are giving birth to a new family. That's how I look at it. Not only are you giving life to that person who may be 2 years old at that time, but now they have a full life and they have a family ahead of them. So it's very gratifying.
Yeah, I can imagine that. It's very important work, especially when you're intervening with children at that age. Since we spoke about obesity and how that's one of the signs and stuff for this kind of liver disease, can people even be slim and still have NAFLD or that kind of issue?
That's true. I mean, there are some rare disorders, lipodystrophy, lysosomal acid lipase deficiency. There's some rare disorders where you can have a normal body mass index and still have fatty liver disease. But again, that is a conundrum which us as liver specialists, for instance, will be able to deal with and the rare disorders. But when you're talking of the general population, it's still the vast majority is going to be from obesity and being overweight. So how we think about it is we do not want to discriminate against anybody who is overweight. If they come in with signs and liver tests abnormal, we screen for all diseases that could have caused them, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and all these rare things I was talking about, to make sure we don't miss anything, but we still start counseling them on diet and lifestyle, because that's not going to be a bad thing. That's always the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Kohli, now we're coming to the exciting part. I know that you're a man with a mission. You have a vision, you see something ahead of you, ways in which you can change things for the better. So what is your mission, and what are the possibilities that you see ahead of you?
That's very kind of you to say what you said. I hope a small part of that may be true. But my mission is to make sure the next generation is well equipped and is starting off of ideas and having the ability to jump off from where we left off. So I am here today because of what I learned from somebody back in the 1990s as my guru, as my idol. I want people to learn from what we have created in terms of a knowledge base and jump off from here and jump higher, jump farther, jump to greater heights. And that's only possible through mentor-mentee relationships. And I feel that our biggest impact is, we talked about research. When you publish a paper, it gets to people you never see. But I think even bigger than that is when you empower someone to learn to think on their own. And when you do that, as a young person, as a child, as a young professional, that person gets to do an immense amount of work, which you would never imagine. You have just lit a lamp. So that's my mission, is to light as many lamps as possible.
Wow. Okay. And what role? So you have used so many of these terms for this disease. Like, you've called it a silent epidemic in the context of Latino kids in the US. You've called it a tsunami of sorts. So what role should governments be playing to reverse this kind of tide and support people like you who are,
Yeah, no, I think advocacy is important at every level. In our homes, as parents, we can be advocates. In schools, as part of, school boards and so forth. In hospitals, what do we allow as food to come in? Beyond that, I think participating in advocacy efforts with our elected officials, making sure. So, for instance, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a very strong statement in the last few years, talking about a soda tax. Certain countries have already done it, where soft drinks, like Mexico, for instance, there is a tax, just like people got used to in the middle 20th century having a taxation on cigarettes. Now there is a taxation on soft drinks in Mexico. And they've seen a significant change in terms of intake, and subsequently a change in metrics of liver health and obesity. So I think there is definitely a contribution each and every one of us can make at different levels, from inside the house all the way to advocacy at the national level. And as part of associations that we belong to, whatever we can put forth in terms of evidence-based, I think is important. So I'm all for intervening at whatever level one is able to and has comfort in.
Before we wind up this interview, it has been such an exciting session. We've all learned, I'm sure the people that are going to watch this, and myself included, we have learned so much. I'm saying that in advance. But I do also want to touch upon a few personal questions. So I know that you have crossed different continents, you've gone through all these different subjects, and you still seem so excited and energetic and enthusiastic about your subject. So I want to know, what is the secret of that? What keeps you motivated on this?
It's very kind of you again. I think I get my energy from the lack of knowledge. There's so much to do. There is so much more to learn, so much more to research, to contribute, to help children from all across the world who need cutting edge therapies, to train people to do those therapies. That's what keeps me excited. So the gaps in knowledge are so vast. When we start learning in medical school, we have so much to learn.
Yeah.
It seems like we know everything when we finish. Like I thought, oh my God, now I know medicine. And then at some point in your career, it clicks. There's so much more to know. So that's where I am right now. I feel like I need to use every moment of time that we still have to either try to find the gaps and fill them ourselves, or train people to help fill them in the future. So that's why I'm excited, because there's so much to do.
Yeah. So what is your role? What is your role as the co-chair for the Center for Global Health Council at the Children's Hospital Los Angeles?
So we're trying to merge all of these things we just talked about. So the Center for Global Health at Children's Los Angeles, we think about our mission in all those quadrants. We want to provide cutting edge healthcare to children who need it from across the world. We want to partner with institutions who would like to improve their pediatric care through partnerships in nursing and administration and education, training. And we want to make sure that we are also dispersing knowledge. So all of those spheres kind of go together, whether it's care, partnerships, or education, research. So those are the things that the center really is proud of, is that we're not going for a uni-directional mission. It's a multilateral mission that we want.
Yeah, that is the best kind, isn't it? Where you intervene at different levels. And
we're learning from each other all the time. I mean, and today's world is so connected and so small. Point in case, you're sitting in Canada, I'm sitting in the US, we're talking to the Indian diaspora. I think it's such a small world we live in. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So we say it's a small world we live in today. And if we don't acknowledge that and leverage that, it is a loss for all of us.
Yeah, sort of a missed opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your advice to the brilliant young doctors and medical students of today who are wanting to contribute and do something different for all of society like you? What are your words to them?
I think it's an amazing time. It's an enriched time. We have so much knowledge behind us, and use it as a jumping off point into the vast ocean of the unknown that is in front of us. You have learned to swim. If you are a professional today, a young professional, you've been to, say, a medical school, you have the knowledge of the past in you. And now we hope you can produce more knowledge for you to share to your future generations. So you are at a jumping off point. Make the leap, make the jump. Find more answers than questions you leave behind. That's what I would say.
Awesome. And this is my last question to you, Dr. Kohli. What does one day in the life of Dr. Kohli look like?
It's a fun day. We my wife and I have 3 children, and the older 2 are getting close to deciding on their career paths. And this is the advice I give them: is make sure whatever career path you choose, you have fun with it. If you talk to a professional today and ask them, and they say they have fun at work, then they're not going to work. They're going to have fun. So I have fun every day. And the mechanics, the layout of the day is not as important. I touch patients, I mentor, I do research, I do administration. I hopefully spend enough time with my family. All that together, at the end of the day, one has to be energized more than the previous day. And that's the beauty of it. If you can come out with something that is fun for you, you have the right job.
Awesome. Well, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible session of sharing your experiences, your knowledge for the rest of our audience. And I wish you all the very best for your mission, and may all the dreams come true.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. The pleasure was all mine.
For those of our viewers who are interested to learn more about Dr. Rohit Kohli and his work, the links to his organizational websites and related links are displayed here, and they will also be shown in the text below the video. Thank you everyone for watching. This is Chandni, and I will see you again in the Global Indian, where we showcase people of Indian origin who are making an impact in the world.